Hi, welcome back. I hope you had a nice week. This week we continue talking about life post COVID and we dedicate this conversation to real estate. How the pandemic affected real estate and what's the future for this sector. So stick around. And this week we talk about real estate, how the pandemic affected real estate, and what the future will bring. I must say, I was supposed to have my cousin and real estate expert Bruno Araújo with me today, but he is very busy, and due to his availability issues, he was not able to be here, but he was very kind and he answered my questions on an email. So I will complement this conversation with his professional input and a more insider input on an article that will be published on my Facebook and LinkedIn. So please take a look at the article because it is very interesting and it has the input of someone that has worked in real estate for a very long time and is an expert in this field, and he knows when he talks about it. He knows because this has been what he has been living with during this pandemic, and obviously he knows and he has a more professional input on what he believes is going to be the future for this sector. So I would also like to thank Bruno for his answers and for taking the time to answer my questions. And I will recommend you to read the article because his answers are really good, and it's really nice to hear from someone that actually has an expert view on this. But for now, let's go with my non-expert view, with my outsider view of real estate and how this pandemic has affected real estate. I would like to start saying that for this analysis, I want to have a bit of an holistic approach to this, because what I think happened is that this whole issue has been seen just in a little bit one-sided, and I think it needs to be seen in a more holistic approach, and where we could see the how one side was affected, the other side was affected, how everyone was affected, and how real estate as a whole was affected by the pandemic. And this, I think, it's the correct way to go about this, rather than just analyzing it through for example, a tenant's perspective or landlord's perspective or residential real estate or commercial real estate. They all parts of real estate. They all parts of the same problem. So, and they all been affected in some way or another. So I think it should be we should look at it in all sides and not just one. For example, and starting with residential real estate, the government has put in place measures that help tenants remain in a property if they lost their job and they can not meet the payments on the rent. Well, I obviously agree with this because I think having a roof to sleep under is a basic necessity of every human being, and I think everyone should have a place to live. However, I think when the government put in place these guidelines and these measures to help tenants, which were obviously correct, they should also look at landlords and also put something in place that could help landlords as well. Because, and I know I lived in Portugal for 30 years, and in Portugal the situation or the rental and landlord and the whole market is totally different. And sometimes, and I grew up thinking that a landlord is someone that is very, very wealthy and has lots of properties. Sometimes they hold entire buildings, which there is quite common. A landlord that owns entire buildings, and they very wealthy, sometimes very wealthy families that own all those estates for ages, for generations and generations. My parents, before they bought the apartment where we were living in, that apartment was owned by one big family, wealthy family in Lisbon, and they basically they owned a lot of properties in the city, and they were the owners of the entire building, and they were very wealthy families. And all those properties, in fact, they built those properties, so they had the land, they built the properties, and then they were leasing out the apartments, and that's how it was working back then. Of course, the market there is also changing. There's a lot of owner occupiers now, but that's and that's the idea I grew up with of a landlord. When I moved to Australia, obviously that idea changed, because in Australia it's not like that, doesn't work like that. Of course, you have very wealthy people that have more properties, but they still have to meet the payments on their mortgages. It's not like they just have lots of money and they have these properties, and if you out of a sudden, if you stop paying the rent, they can tell you, okay, you stop paying the rent for 1 year, and we talk about it next year, and that's okay, because I can do this. Well, it doesn't happen like that. A lot of the investors in real estate in Australia are just common people, just like myself, just like you, that invest their savings in real estate, and they live to pay their mortgages and to meet these payments. So if they lose the income that comes from the rent of these properties, they may be in a very, very, very difficult situation, where they either default on their mortgages or they will have to sell the property. So I think when the government created these measures to help tenants, which were correct, they should also create something to help landlords as well. And that didn't happen. Of course, landlords were affected, and tenants were really, really affected, because if you work in, let's say, in the hospitality industry, or if you work in the tourism industry, or in one of these industries that were really hard hit by this pandemic, you lost your job, you probably on JobKeeper or JobSeeker, and we all know that because the rents in Australia, and mainly in Sydney, are so expensive, you may be using most of your JobKeeper or JobSeeker to meet the payments on your rent, and you won't be able to afford for food, etc., etc. I must say as well that there is other complements to your income available through Centrelink in Australia, which is the rent supplement for those who lost income, etc., etc. So there's also other options available for tenants, but obviously the situation is very complicated at the moment. So seeing this on a more holistic approach, and seeing that both sides are struggling and it's a struggle for both, I think it gives us a more wider view of the real problem, rather than just seeing it in one side. The rental market has dropped. Yes, it did, because in some areas where were mainly populated by either international students or recent migrants, obviously it had an impact, and it was an instant impact, because COVID hit, international borders were closed, and no more international students coming to Australia, and no more migrants because the borders were closed. Obviously, this left a lot of properties empty, and landlords had to lower the prices of the rents they were asking in order to try to get some tenants in, which not always happened because obviously there is no demand for those properties. For tenants, it might be a positive effect because if you are at the moment in a property and you didn't lose your job and you are in a position that you can change and you are thinking about moving to a better property or better area or something like that, you might be able to find something a little bit more affordable because the rents went down. For a landlord that has to meet the payments, if that rent goes below the payments that they have to make in their mortgage, then they really have a problem. So it's not that easy for both sides. Commercial real estate, in my view, was the segment of real estate that was really, really badly hit because when the pandemic hit, some business had to automatically shut down because we were in lockdown and non-essential services were forced to close, and of course those tenants were unable to pay their rents. In my view, commercial real estate, and as we also mentioned in the interview with George, it have a totally different dynamics. It's a different thing, and there's more flexibility for negotiations, and there's more flexibility to things to be changed. And I think here businesses should also be helped because of course if they had to close down, if unfortunately they had to lay off their staff because they cannot operate, it's obvious they won't be able to pay the rent, and it should be also something that should be looked after. I know that in recent days has been on the news that, for example, Westfield, the owners of most shopping centers in Australia and some overseas, have there's reports that they have locked down some of their tenants because they haven't met their payments. I think this is wrong. I think there should be negotiations and things should be done, especially in companies like Westfield, that they build the places, and obviously the rents that they charge in those shopping centers are really high, and obviously there's room there for negotiation, and these tenants should be helped as well because from these they flourish. Otherwise those places in shopping centers, and I saw that in my local Westfield, there's a lot of shops that are actually closed and nobody's there because of this. And the other day I went to another Westfield in another area, and I witnessed exactly the same thing. Some shops are just closed and nobody's there. So in the end, if they don't do anything and if they don't do something to work for both ways, they will both lose. So I think something needs to be done. As for residential landlords, I think in the beginning banks came too eager to help, so they say, saying that they could freeze your mortgage. You could talk to your bank and freeze your mortgage for 6 months. Then they extended it because the pandemic was, the situation was a bit longer than expected, and they were extending that period, etc., etc. You can go to your bank, you can tell them you lost your job, or you lost income from the rent of your tenants, etc., etc., and you can freeze your mortgage. Well, as an investor, I would say that I would only go for this option if I really, really, really didn't have any other option on the table. Because if you freeze your mortgage, yes, the bank is going to freeze your mortgage. You won't have to pay, you don't have to meet your repayments for all those 6 months. But what is happening during those 6 months is that the bank is still calculating the interest on the mortgage that you have. And in the end of this freezing period, you will have all that interest accrued on your mortgage. So in fact, your mortgage wasn't freezed at all. Your mortgage was increased by the interest that would be charged if you were paying it. So I would say that you should look into it, and you should really see your options. And if you have other options on the table, if you can do it some other way, I would say I would choose something different rather than this freeze on your mortgage, because this freeze on your mortgage, in my view, it's going to put you worse off. And the banks are not helping you at all, in my view. So let's see now what will be the future for real estate. And what will be the future for the real estate market? Well, I think it all depends in a lot of factors, and one of them is what governments put forward in order to help both tenants and landlords. In my view, and I've said that so many times before, I don't think we're going to get rid of COVID anytime soon. I don't think even with the vaccine that it's going to be gone forever. I think what is most likely to happen is that we will eventually learn to live with COVID, obviously taking measures to prevent it and to be safe, such as washing our hands regularly, some form of social distancing, and other things like that. Obviously, if the vaccine is eventually created, we may have a situation where we have to be vaccinated, let's say every year or every 2 years, or whenever it's decided we should do so. But I don't think it will be an eradication situation here. I don't think it will. I hope it is, but I don't see it coming. So if we really need to live with this, then we really need to create measures and create an environment where we can make this possible. So I think, for starters, it all depends on what the governments do and what they bring to the table in order to make it possible. For example, if the situation with unemployment continues to be as bad as it is at the moment, I don't think the help with rentals will ever cease, because there's no other way that those people can afford to have a home rather than having this help at the moment, because they have no incomes. So that should be something that the government obviously needs to look into and needs to create a situation where they can help tenants to remain in those properties. However, if we don't really look to landlords, we create a much bigger problem. In my view, we will create a much bigger problem, because yes, we are helping the tenants. Yes, they're not paying rent, or they're paying less rent, or there's all this situation at the moment. But if we don't help the landlords that are losing on the rent, we may get to a point Yeah, they may have accepted that offer, that bank offer of freezing their mortgage, but that banks are already saying that they will end that freeze, and people will eventually have to start repaying their mortgages. And they say that they will look at each case and analyze the situation in a case-by-case basis. But we know banks, they want the money, and they will eventually force landlords to start repaying their mortgage. And they really didn't lose any money at all, if we look at it, because they kept on charging on the interest. So the ones worse off in this situation will always be the landlords that will have to pay the mortgage that they initially had. They only had a little break of paying that amount, but while they were having that break, actually that mortgage was growing because the bank kept charging the interest. So the bank hasn't lost anything, the landlord did. And if the bank eventually forces that to happen, if the job seeker and job keeper eventually ceases to be present, or people no longer get these two supplements, then what will happen is that people may not be able to pay these mortgages, and eventually will lead to a massive flooding of the market with properties for sale, or the banks repossessing properties like we saw in the GFC, we saw happening in the US. Well, that is not an ideal situation, and that is something that, to be honest, I don't think the banks want that, because it's not very pleasant for them, and it's not very profitable for them either. And in that case, and if we get to this very, very drastic point, then yes, it will be a crash. I will think it will be a crash, and the bubble will eventually burst. But I don't think it will get to that. I think the situation is obviously complicated for both sides, but I believe something will be put in place to manage the situation, because I believe banks will also want to avoid this, because if we get to the point that people can no longer pay mortgages and they start selling and flooding the market will go down, it will crash, and the banks won't basically get what they want. They won't get their money, because the properties won't no longer be worth what the banks want. So I think there's something will be done in regards to avoid this. I think one of the things that and one of the sides of real estate that will take longer to recover would definitely be commercial real estate, because obviously with COVID and all this restructuring, companies will look at what office space do they need, and eventually there will be companies that will be telling their landlords, well, I no longer need 3 levels, I need only 2 levels, because I have 2 or 3 teams that can work from home, or other landlords that other tenants that may actually say, okay, because of all the restrictions, etc., I may take another space, which I don't think it will happen actually. So it will be that. It will be lots of businesses that eventually go down, unfortunately, and we've seen that. And as I said, I walked through my local Westfield the other day, and a lot of shops are closed. I went to another Westfield in another suburb, and I saw exactly the same thing. So and that is also a problem, because if those businesses are shut down, and if those shops are empty, it's very unlikely that someone will take them over, because everyone is cautious at the moment of starting a business, because the economy is so bad. There's no consumer confidence at all, and of course you're not going to start something in a situation like the one we have. So I think that will be the commercial real estate will obviously take longer to adjust and will take longer to recover from the situation. But I think in the long run there would be also ways, and it will adjust. It will eventually find forms or a way forward for the sector to continue operating, because obviously I don't think the concept of office will ever disappear. There will always be companies that need offices. There will always be companies, and there will always be workers that will need to go to an office, to a physical space, because they have to meet clients, or because the work that they do really needs to be in a certain space. And obviously there will always be the need for the commercial real estate, because there will always be the need for commercial properties to exist, so companies can function normally. So I don't think it will out of a sudden everyone starts working from home and the companies will just don't have offices anymore and everyone works from home. I don't think that will happen. Even in some cases where workers could work from home, some companies will still prefer them to go to the office, and others will be the employees that actually prefer to go to the office and see their colleagues and have that interaction rather than just working from home. So we will have a lot of adjustment to be made, and I believe that will happen. However, I don't think it will be the end for commercial real estate. Of course, it's never going to be the end. It's just going to be an adjustment, and for the commercial real estate it may just take longer than for residential real estate. The rental market, I think it will be the most affected in the end with all of this, because of what I just said. If the borders are closed for longer, and if immigration it's not here, because obviously with the pandemic there will be limitations on immigration, and it won't start anytime soon. Foreign students may eventually start coming, we don't know when, and of course all of that is affecting the rental market, which can be positive for tenants, but as I said, it can be really not as positive for landlords, depending on how much equity they have on the properties, and if those properties are cash flow positive or cash flow negative. It all depends on the type of investment, it all depends on the type of property. Some landlords may be in a position of actually dealing with the current situation, even lower the rents and still be able to meet their payments, because they have a lot of equity in the properties, because their loans are almost paid, and therefore they can afford to do that. But other landlords that may have just invested in the property and have a massive loan to pay may not be in a position to offer the same thing at the moment, and that's where things need to be analyzed and thought carefully and thoroughly in order to come up with solutions that will actually benefit everyone. And we need to look at it in a perspective, in a holistic approach, so we can see all aspects of the same problem, and we come with a solution that will benefit all stakeholders, and we come with a much better industry in the end. And I believe that's eventually what may happen. And it's all for today. I hope you liked this analysis I've made of real estate market, what it has been so far and what could be in the future. However, I will remind you and recommend that you read the article that I will publish today on LinkedIn and Facebook with Bruno's answers on this matter. Bruno has been a real estate himself for a very long time, and he has a very comprehensive knowledge of this sector, and he knows he has been living with this situation basically for all the duration of 2020, and he knows what has been happening with the market so far, and he obviously has a very informed view of what the future could bring to his sector. So I will recommend you to read the article with Bruno's answers. I will also like once again to thank Bruno for taking the time and answering my questions. And I would like to let you all know that if you have any property that you would like to sell, Bruno is not on the sales department at the moment, but if you contact him, he will be able to refer you to one of his colleagues in his agency. And if you have a property that you are currently lending, so if you are in the leasing market, you can also contact Bruno. He is a property manager and he will be able to help you with that. Obviously, you need to live in Sydney. His agency is Century 21 in Cronulla. I'll leave the link below so you can contact Bruno with your queries. Again, if you have any queries about anything that we spoke about in this video, please feel free to leave your comments below and share. Why not? Share with your friends so we make these conversations even bigger, and subscribe so you get a notification of a new conversation every week. I would like to thank you all for being here and for listening, and wish you a very good week, and see you next time. Thank you very much for watching. Bye.